Have you ever felt disliked before you even introduced yourself? As if something about you, your tone, your calmness, your presence, simply disrupted someone else? They smile, yes. They nod politely. But beneath the surface, there's something colder, a quiet judgment, a subtle rejection, a sense that you're being resented, for reasons no one will say out loud. And that's what makes it so confusing. Because you were kind, you were respectful, you didn't cross any lines, yet somehow your mere existence became too much, too visible, too composed, too free. And without knowing why, you become the villain in a story you never agreed to play. Welcome to the invisible world of silent hatred. It doesn't shout, it whispers. It doesn't attack directly, it withholds warmth. It shows up in passive remarks, in cold shoulders, in the unexplained distance of people you barely even knew. And here's the trap. You start to wonder, did I say something wrong? Should I change how I speak, smile more, shrink a little? But what if I told you, their hatred isn't truly about you? What if you didn't trigger offense, but realization? What if your strength exposed their insecurity? What if your calmness reflected their chaos? What if your presence was simply too honest for their illusion? Stoicism teaches a timeless truth. We are not disturbed by what happens, but by how we interpret what happens. And often when people dislike you in silence, it has nothing to do with your flaws, and everything to do with what you mirror back to them. This video isn't about blame. It's not about paranoia. It's about clarity. Together, we'll explore 9 hidden reasons why people may secretly resent you, and how Stoic philosophy can help you meet that resentment with wisdom, strength, and inner stillness. Because once you understand why they hate, you stop internalizing their noise. And when you stop internalizing, you start mastering. You're not here to be understood by everyone. You're here to live with integrity, even when misunderstood. So if you've ever felt the sting of being quietly disliked without explanation or closure, you're not alone. And more importantly, you don't need to carry what was never yours. Let's begin. Some people don't actually hate you. They hate the parts of themselves that you accidentally awaken. You didn't provoke them. You didn't insult or ignore them. You simply existed as you are, and somehow that was too much. When you walk in with quiet confidence, you remind them of how often they've chosen to shrink. When you speak with clarity, you confront the confusion they've grown comfortable with. When you live with consistency, you hold up a mirror to their hesitation. You become, without trying, a reflection, and not everyone is ready to face their own image. That's the paradox of presence. You didn't say a word, yet something in you speaks louder than any speech. Your discipline, your stillness, your boundaries, your refusal to seek permission. To someone still living in denial, that kind of groundedness feels threatening. It's not that you did anything wrong, it's that you embody something they've betrayed in themselves. So their discomfort turns outward. But instead of saying, I wish I had that, they whisper, who do they think they are? They begin to minimize you, mock your ambition, question your motives, or avoid you altogether. Because hating you is easier than confronting what you reflect back to them. Marcus Aurelius once said, the opinion of 10,000 men is of no value if none of them knows anything about the subject. And most people don't know you. They only know the story they've projected onto you, a story that reveals more about them than about you. This is where Stoicism becomes your anchor. You don't need to defend your worth. You don't need to correct their narrative. You don't even need to be understood, because peace doesn't come from convincing others. It comes from understanding yourself. So when someone resents you, passively, irrationally, or without reason, pause and ask, did I actually do something wrong? Or did I simply reveal something they're not ready to see? You'll often realize you did nothing but stand in your truth. That's not arrogance. That's alignment. Some will see your light as a guide. Others will mistake it for a spotlight, exposing what they've worked hard to hide. But Epictetus reminds us, you may fetter my leg, but not even Zeus can take away my free will. You can't control who feels triggered by your clarity, and you don't need to dim your light just so others feel more comfortable in their shadows. Let them flinch, let them frown, let them turn away. You remain gentle, exact, sovereign, because the more you understand that their hate is projection, not truth, the less power it holds. You stop internalizing their discomfort. And when you stop internalizing, you start rising, not above them, but beyond them. That is the beginning of real freedom. There's something about silence that makes loud people nervous. You've seen it. You enter a room and say only what's needed. You listen more than you speak. You pause, you choose your words carefully, you're deliberate, measured, still, and suddenly, you're too quiet, too serious, too distant. But what they really mean is this: you're not playing the noise game. You're not over-explaining. You're not rushing to fill awkward silence. You're not performing for attention. You're simply present. And in a world addicted to distraction, presence feels like resistance. Most people use noise to outrun themselves. Constant talking, posting, reacting, it's not connection, it's escape. So when you arrive with stillness, you don't just break the pattern, you expose what's underneath it. Your calm becomes a mirror, and not everyone wants to look. To some, your silence feels like judgment. To others, it feels like control. To the insecure, it feels like power they can't reach. Because they can't read you, can't provoke you, can't predict what you'll do next. So they label you arrogant, closed off, mysterious. But deep down, they know you're just not interested in the performance. Seneca said, "It is a great thing to know when to speak and when to be silent." You want to know the difference. You don't interrupt wisdom with noise. You don't dilute meaning by rushing to respond. You wait, you observe, you stay anchored. And that alone is enough to make people uncomfortable, because silence strips away the mask. And what's left is truth. And truth isn't always flattering. Those addicted to attention find your restraint confusing. Those who control with words find your quiet threatening. They can't provoke you into reaction, so they resent you for not playing. But Stoicism doesn't teach us to stay silent out of fear. It teaches us to speak only when speech serves virtue. You don't seek conflict, but you won't flinch when it comes. You don't chase attention because you've already made peace with yourself. Marcus Aurelius reminds us, the best revenge is not to be like your enemy. When noise meets silence, you don't compete. You remain calm. You stay still. Because stillness is not the absence of action. It is the refusal to be moved by chaos. Let them call you cold. Let them guess what you're thinking. Let them stir the air with speculation. You stay unmoved, because real presence doesn't shout, it grounds. And in a world that equates loudness with confidence, your restraint becomes radical. You're not here to fill space. You're here to hold space. You're not here to prove you belong. You're here to embody what belongs to you, your peace. Most people don't relate to you. They relate to the role they've assigned you. The nice one, the helper, the follower, the one who stays quiet, the one who doesn't say no. They build a script in their mind, a character for you to play. And as long as you stay inside that box, they're comfortable. But then you break character. You speak up. You set boundaries. You choose yourself. You stop agreeing just to keep the peace. Suddenly you're difficult. You've changed. You're not who you used to be. But here's the truth. You didn't change. You evolved. You remembered who you were before they reduced you. And that terrifies them. Because when you step outside their story, you challenge the one they're telling themselves. If you can grow, they have no excuse to stay stagnant. If you can rewrite your role, they might have to confront the parts of their life they've chosen not to change. Some people don't hate you for being wrong. They hate you for being different from who they needed you to remain. Your courage reminds them of their complacency. Your voice disturbs their narrative. Stoicism teaches, don't explain your philosophy, embody it. Epictetus. You don't need to justify your growth. You don't need to write essays defending your boundaries. Your integrity is its own language. The people meant to hear it will. Let others misinterpret your transformation. They were never committed to your truth, only to their comfort. If someone only loves the version of you they can control, that's not love. It's strategy. When you stop being who they cast you as, they lose their grip. So they call you fake. They say you changed, but all you did was return to yourself. Marcus Aurelius said, "If someone despises me, that's their problem. My only concern is not doing or saying anything despicable." You don't owe anyone your stillness just because they're afraid of your motion. Let them grieve the version of you that was easier to manage. Let them feel the discomfort of no longer having a character in their story. You were never meant to be scripted. You were never meant to be agreeable at the cost of your soul. You are the author now. Write freely, live truly, and remember, when someone resents you for growing, they're not rejecting you. They're rejecting the part of themselves that refuses to rise. Let them. You continue. There's a quiet kind of strength that rarely gets applause. It doesn't make headlines. It doesn't seek attention, but it builds empires. It's called consistency. And it's one of the rarest things in the modern world. You show up day after day, not because someone's watching, but because you gave your word to yourself. You honor the commitment, even when motivation is gone, even when results are slow, even when no one notices. And that makes people uncomfortable. Why? Because your discipline becomes a mirror to their excuses. You don't intend to shame them. You're just doing your work. But your presence reminds them of every promise they broke to themselves. You become a quiet contradiction to their comfort, and instead of rising, they mock you. You're obsessed. You're too intense. You need to relax. But what they really mean is, you're making it harder for me to justify quitting. Stoicism doesn't chase praise. It builds character. Marcus Aurelius said, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." You don't post to prove your worth. You don't share every step. You simply keep going. While others seek short-term validation, you invest in long-term integrity. That kind of focus? It exposes what others fear, that their potential is being wasted by choice. And that truth is hard to swallow. So they attack the habit. They call consistency boring, but only because they've built their identity around chaos. Let them judge. Your proof is not in your defense, it's in your discipline. Every quiet repetition is a seed they cannot see yet. But one day, when the results become undeniable, they'll ask you how you did it. And you won't need to say much, because time speaks for those who show up. Let others chase dopamine. You chase depth. Let them wait for inspiration. You train your will. You're not addicted to the start. You're committed to the process. And yes, it will cost you connections, because some people love the version of you who makes them feel better about staying still. But when you move with intention, you challenge their inertia. That's when resentment surfaces. Not because you've changed, but because they haven't. Stoicism isn't about perfection. It's about direction. It's about choosing what's difficult, because it leads to what's true. So keep showing up, even when it's thankless, even when it's silent, even when no one claps. Because what you're building is not applause, it's identity. We live in the age of performance. People don't just want to do good. They want to be seen doing good. Virtue becomes branding. Compassion becomes content. Every moment becomes a post. But you don't play that game. You move quietly. You serve without spectacle. You grow without seeking congratulations. You live your values, not for show, but because they matter to you. And that makes some people uncomfortable. Because in a world where image is everything, your authenticity feels like rebellion. Your quiet integrity reveals their noisy self-promotion. Your discipline, lived in private, discredits their curated consistency. They'll say you're secretive, unengaged, not inspirational enough. But what they really mean is, you're not performing, And I don't know how to read that. Epictetus reminds us, don't explain your philosophy, embody it. You don't claim to be disciplined. You show up when no one claps. You don't post about being humble. You just listen more than you speak. You don't label yourself wise. You simply pause, observe, and respond. And that level of restraint confuses those addicted to visibility, because if you can live aligned without the audience, what does that say about those who rely on it? What if everything they built was more about applause than truth? That's why your presence bothers them. You make them question their motives. You make them feel exposed, not by judgment, but by contrast. You've chosen to be real in a world that thrives on role play, and when you stop performing, you break the social contract they never told you existed. A contract that says, pretend, keep it light, stay likable. But Stoicism never asked you to be likable. It asked you to be inwardly whole. So let them misunderstand. Let them feel awkward around your depth. Let them whisper that something about you is hard to pin down. Because what they're really saying is, you're not acting, and I don't know how to respond to that. Let them keep broadcasting. You remain rooted, because truth doesn't need a hashtag, and virtue doesn't need a camera. It only needs courage, consistency, and the willingness to go unseen, but never unfelt. You start saying no, and suddenly you're the villain. Not rude and not unkind, just unavailable, just unwilling, just clear. And that clarity offends them, because some people weren't looking for connection. They were looking for access. They weren't building a relationship. They were building a routine of expectation. They confused your kindness with compliance. They thought your silence meant agreement. They assumed your yes was permanent. And when you finally draw a line, a gentle, necessary, reasonable line, they call you selfish. But boundaries are not selfish. They are self-respect in action. Stoicism teaches, no person is free who is not master of themselves. Epictetus. And mastery begins with what you allow. You are not free if your time belongs to everyone. You are not grounded if your emotions are up for negotiation. You are not whole if your energy leaks to every demand. Boundaries are not a rejection of others. They are a recognition of yourself. They say, this is what I will protect. This is what I will no longer trade for approval. This is how I maintain inner order in a disordered world. But here's the truth. Entitled people don't want equal connection. They want quiet submission. They want you available when they call, agreeable when they're unreasonable, and apologetic when you assert yourself. And when you no longer fit that script, they accuse you of changing. But you didn't change. You stopped shrinking. Let them misinterpret your limits. Let them call your silence distance. Let them call your no a betrayal. Their discomfort is not your cruelty. It's their ego adjusting to a new reality, where you're no longer bendable. Your job is not to manage their disappointment. Your job is to preserve the vessel through which your purpose flows. Boundaries don't destroy love. They reveal whether it was ever real. Because real connection respects space. It doesn't require access. It recognizes that saying no isn't rejection. It's clarity. And clarity for some is unbearable. So let them judge. Because what offends the entitled liberates the self-respecting. And your peace, it's not found in saying yes. It's found in saying yes only when you mean it. You walk into the room, calm, grounded, clear, not loud, not defensive, just present, and still the energy shifts. You didn't posture, you didn't brag, you didn't belittle, but someone feels threatened because some people mistake dignity for ego. They're so used to people shrinking. They call anyone who stands tall arrogant. You don't speak to impress. You speak to contribute. You don't demand attention. You hold your space. But when others depend on hierarchy to feel safe, your composure feels like rebellion. Why? Because you won't play small to protect their comfort. And to the insecure, self-respect feels like superiority. Stoicism teaches, be tolerant with others, strict with yourself. Marcus Aurelius. You live that. You expect more of yourself than you do of others. But they don't see that. They only see someone who no longer plays the validation game. You used to bend, you used to stay quiet, you used to laugh along. Now, you pause, you say no, you mean what you say, and they can't handle that because your presence exposes their performance. Your boundaries expose their need to control. Your steadiness reminds them how often they wobble. But here's what they won't admit. They miss the version of you who needed their approval. Not because they loved you, but because they could manage you. Now that you're anchored, they resent the weight of your clarity. They try to twist it. You're proud. You've changed. You think you're better, but you don't think you're better. You just don't think you need to apologize for knowing your worth. Epictetus said, if someone speaks ill of you, do not defend yourself. Instead say, clearly they don't know the rest of my faults. That's not arrogance, that's emotional economy. You don't invest in arguments with people who are reacting to their own reflection. Your peace doesn't need to be defended, only protected. Let them think what they want. You're not here to manage perception, you're here to embody alignment, and that will always offend those still outsourcing their identity. So let them misunderstand. Let them label. Because self-respect doesn't need a defense, it just needs to be lived. Some people don't want connection. They want control, disguised as closeness. They want to shape how you respond, predict how you react, pull the strings of your emotion and call it love. And as long as you follow the script, laugh when they expect it, apologize when you haven't done wrong, agree when they're unreasonable, you're easy to be around. But then you stop playing. You pause before replying. You don't explain every choice. You let silence speak. You set limits calmly, and suddenly you're cold. You've changed. You're selfish. But what really changed is that they lost control over your emotional landscape. And when manipulation fails, resentment begins. Because your peace is no longer dependent on their approval. And to those who equate control with love, freedom feels like betrayal. Stoicism teaches, freedom is the only worthy goal in life. Epictetus. And freedom begins when you stop letting others shape who you must be. Just to keep things peaceful. You're no longer predictable. You don't flinch at withdrawal. You don't chase after guilt. You don't react on cue. And to those who thrive on reaction, your restraint is rejection. But it's not rejection, it's self-possession. They'll call you distant, uncaring, detached. But what they're really saying is, I can't move you anymore. And that to them feels like loss. Because their sense of power was built on your compliance. Now your silence becomes unsettling. Your clarity becomes disruptive. Your sovereignty becomes unforgivable. But Marcus Aurelius reminds us, if it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. And it is not right to pretend, appease, or perform just so someone else can avoid facing themselves. You are not obligated to be available to manipulation, even if it wears the mask of affection. So let them resent you. Let them misinterpret your stillness as arrogance. Let them mistake your peace for indifference. Because the moment you stop being controlled is the moment you start becoming unshakable. And in a world of button pushers, the most powerful thing you can do is remove the panel. Sometimes people don't hate you for what you did. They hate you for what you reveal. You didn't insult them. You didn't overstep. You just lived. And your life triggered their memory of what they used to want, of who they could have been, of what they still crave, but now fear. Your consistency reminds them of their excuses. Your calmness reminds them of their chaos. Your courage reminds them of their regret. And so, they reject the mirror. Because you don't just stand before them. You reflect them. Not the image they show to the world, but the one they've been hiding from themselves. You didn't try to expose them, but your very presence makes avoidance harder. And when people are forced to see what they've buried, they blame the light. Not because you judge them, but because your growth made their stagnation unbearable. Carl Jung said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." But most don't want understanding. They want comfort. They want familiarity and not mirrors. So when you walk in as yourself, whole, evolving, honest, they shrink. And instead of rising, they resent. They project, "You think you're better. You've changed. You're not real." But what they're really saying is, "You've become what I was too afraid to become." And that reflection, it hurts, not because you caused harm, but because they recognize a version of themselves they gave up on. Marcus Aurelius reminds us, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. If their thoughts are rooted in fear, bitterness, and comparison, your presence will feel like a threat, but it's not your responsibility to filter your truth so someone else can stay numb. You don't need to dim, you don't need to soften, you don't need to disappear, just so others don't have to face their shadow. You are not their enemy. You are their unfinished sentence, their avoided truth, their unopened door. Let them reject you, but don't reject yourself to be accepted by those who've rejected their own evolution. You didn't trigger their hate, you triggered their memory. You were the reminder, the mirror, the spark. And if someone can't stand your light, they were never meant to walk beside it. Let them go. You keep shining. Now you see it. When people secretly hate you, it's almost never about you, and almost always about what you reflect. Your strength reminds them of their hesitation. Your calm unsettles their chaos. Your growth highlights their stagnation. You don't provoke them, you reveal them, and that's what makes you hard to be around. But here's what Stoicism teaches. You are not here to be liked. You are here to live with integrity. You are not responsible for how others interpret your boundaries, your silence, your presence. You are only responsible for walking your path, honestly, quietly, without apology. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." You cannot stop people from projecting, but you can stop absorbing it. You cannot control their resentment, but you can control your response. And your response is simple. You remain still, grounded, free, because true peace does not come from avoiding offense. It comes from knowing who you are and no longer apologizing for it. So if they hate your growth, keep growing. If they reject your truth, keep speaking. If they walk away, let them walk. You're not losing people. You're losing distortion. And in that loss, you find clarity. Let go of those who can't meet you where you are. Without bitterness, without revenge, without closing your heart, just continue. You don't need to convince. You don't need to defend. You simply need to remain yourself. In a world that constantly asks you to become something else, if this message spoke to you, comment stillness below to mark this point in your journey. Share what resonated most. Your story may help someone else feel seen. And if you want more calm, clarity, and strength in a noisy world, subscribe to Stoic Viva. Hit like. Share this with someone who needs it. Let's build a world where peace isn't rare, just quietly practiced. Until next time, stay grounded, stay true, and stay free.